This is the Rich Dad Radio Show. The good news and bad news about money. Here's Robert Kiyosaki.
Hello. This is Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, broadcasting from gorgeous Old Town Scottsdale, Arizona, where it's either heaven or hell, and right now it's heaven. Everything's perfect. And today our subject is, it started off as a 5-piece subject. It's called Who Stole My Pensions? And the more we do these things, the number of people coming out of the woodwork who want to tell their stories about what happened to their pensions keeps growing. So what started off as a 5-unit program is now going probably to 10. And the reason it's important for all of you listening to this, this story about the pension time bomb, is because it is the biggest story that nobody knows about. And it's only now making the news. And the reason this pension time bomb is so important, because it's much like this coronavirus and all that. It's a systemic problem. Like coronavirus isn't about you and me getting the sniffles. It's about the whole supply chains breaking down all over the world, which will cause crashes all over the world. So this, I don't know Sarah, what number is this? This is number 3. It started off as a 5-unit program, and now it's expanding. So we have some very exciting people who just want to tell all and let the world know how this pension program is going to blow up and is going to bring down the biggest crisis, bigger than coronavirus, bigger than the subprime of 2008, and bigger than the student loan program. Simply said, you've been ripped off. That's really what's happening here, being ripped off. And one of the ways that Wall Street, the U.S. government, and the banking system rips us off is via our pensions. So stay tuned on the Rich Dad Show. We have more of these programs coming up to let you know how Wall Street, the government, and the crooks of the world have been stealing our wealth via different vehicles. And this vehicle is a pension. One of them is student loan. One is your home mortgage. One is the stock market. So this is a very, very important series of programs. I started off as 5, and we might stop at 10. We never know. So our guest today, again, is Ted Siddell. He is my co-author on the book, Who Stole My Pension? And our second guest is Mark Green. And Mark Green is in the book, Who Stole My Pension? And Mark is a 30-year veteran, a UPS driver from upstate New York. He is formerly the organizer and president of the Teamsters Alliance for Pension Protection, a.k.a. TAPP, a grassroots pension watchdog organization. Mark led efforts to raise funds to perform the first ever forensic investigation of a union multi-employer plan, the New York State Teamsters Conference Pension and Retirement Fund. They were robbed blind. So, Ted, let's start with you because you're my co-author on Who Stole My Pension. Please give me a little bit of your background about why you and I are interested in pensions. You're like, my dad didn't have a pension, poor dad, and your dad didn't have a pension. So please introduce yourself, Ted, and then how you got interested in pensions.
Sure. Thanks, Robert. My background is I'm a former SEC attorney, and I have done over $1 trillion in forensic investigations of pensions, and some of the first investigations ever done. And one of the things that I uncovered in these investigations is that the reason these pensions were failing was not because not enough money was going into them or the benefits being paid out to workers were too rich. It was because the people running the pensions were grossly mismanaging the money, what we call gross malpractice, generally practice. And for the investigation I did of Mark Green's pension, the New York State Teamsters pension, is in the book, in the exhibits to the book. And that was the first forensic investigation of over 121 multi-employer pensions that are going to be taken over by the government. And so that was the first one that was ever done.
So, and also, like my dad lost his pension because of corruption again in government, and he ran for lieutenant governor of the state of Hawaii and got crushed and lost his pension. And what happened to your dad?
Yeah, well, my dad worked in the intelligence community, and so he disappeared in 1971 in East Africa, and it turned out he had been murdered in Africa in doing an investigation for the American government of Idi Amin, the brutal dictator. So he had, since he just, and his body could not be found, his life insurance wouldn't pay, Social Security wouldn't pay, his estate couldn't be probated. So there was nothing available for those of us, the survivors of the family. So he had no pension either.
So one of the reasons I think Ted and I are simpatico, brothers on this project of the book called Who Stole My Pension, is that our fathers had their pensions taken, and we're very concerned at this moment. There's many mothers and fathers who will find out, if they already have not found out, they have no pension. And that's why but it's more than just the pension. It's the ripple effect, like the coronavirus is going to have upon the whole system of the world economy. So, Mark Green, thank you and welcome to the program. And I'm glad you raised the money to hire Ted Siddell to go in after the pension. So tell us your story, Mark, please.
Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate you guys working on this project and bringing attention to this pretty serious issue, which is affecting us in upstate New York and across the whole country. So, how I met Ted. It started back in 2010, actually, the story. We have to step back a little bit. Our fund started sending us letters in the mail saying that we were under 65% funded, which is critical status. So there was a law passed under the Pension Protection Act of 2006 that said the trustees had to make benefit cuts and implement a funding improvement plan. So that's when we first started forming committees. That's when I started getting people together, calling attention to this problem. And we saw a lot of irregularities. What the trustees were telling us, there was misleading statements, and we called them out on it. So as the years went by, they kept saying there's enough money in the plan to pay all the promised benefits, and you have nothing to worry about. That's what they were telling people publicly. This is a 34,000 member plan with 34,000 families involved, keep in mind. Privately, they were telling us that the fund needed a 14% investment return every year for the next 10 to 15 years just to break even and not take a backward step. So we knew they were not being honest with the participants. So we had these meetings, parking lot meetings, town halls, and we started raising money in 2016 to get some intervention, and that's where Ted came in. So, thank you, Ted. I appreciate your work on this investigation, and unfortunately, we find that the plan was grossly mismanaged, and now I can't retire. Me along with thousands of other people can't retire because the benefit is way too low. And so that's the story. As of right now, we can't get the money back, but certainly we want some reform with pension legislation to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else.
So
Mark, didn't your pension benefit get slashed in half?
So the tiers of cuts are kind of complicated to explain. In my case, when I was hired at UPS, I was promised a pension 30 years. I can leave at any age. So last year I was 48 years old. I just turned 49. If I were to leave right now, my pension would be cut between 53 and 57%. And the numbers I received is $2,300 a month. Okay. However, the reality is, based on what we see right now, is that as our fund is on life support and the PBGC, which is the insurance backstop, the federal insurance program that backstop these pensions, my maximum benefit will be $12,870 per year. Actually, $12,780 per year.
I mean, that's $1,000 a month?
Yeah, that's $1,000 a month, and it's really less than that. It's more around 900 because that's proactively, adjusted. So that's the reality for people that are watching this pension closely. We're looking at the numbers. We do not think it's going to emerge from, the critical declining status it's in, especially with this market volatility. You mentioned coronavirus, Rob. Volatility is very bad for a plan like ours. So I'm looking at less than $1,000 a month. So I'm forced to stay working at this job.
So let me get the math, because I was never good at math in school. So you were expecting, if you spent 30 years at UPS, you'd be making approximately $5,000 a month when you retired after 30 years. And what you're saying is now after 30 years, it might be less than $1,000. That's a 40.
Correct.
Huge haircut.
Correct. Yeah. It's a huge cut considering that on my behalf, which was money contributed through wage deferrals, stagnated wages, employer contributions from UPS, almost $500,000 was put into this account on my behalf. So just look at thousands of other full-time workers. 500,000. What does that translate into over 30 years? Investment return at 6%, let's say, right? And now I'm being told $1,000 a month. Well, I'm being told $2,300, but realistically, if the plan goes insolvent, $900 a month. It shouldn't be happening. It's a Fortune 500 company that's earning record profits. So we have a big problem here, obviously.
So that's when you raised the money and you hired Ted Siddell, and Ted stepped in. And once again, Ted's qualifications are he's a former SEC attorney, so he sees it from the inside looking out. And so, Ted, when you stepped into Mark Green's UPS driver pension, what did you find?
Well, I tell you, Robert, the most amazing thing at the get-go was what I found was that the newsletters that the people running the pension were sending to the memberships, people like Mark, the truck drivers, kept saying as late as 2014, there's plenty of money in the pension. Don't worry about your getting paid the pension benefits you've been promised. So up until just a couple of years before they informed the membership they were not going to get their money, they were affirmatively promising in these newsletters that there was plenty of money there and members shouldn't worry. So if you're in any pension in this country, corporate or government pension, and you're being told there's plenty of money there, don't believe it. Do your own analysis. But that was one of the most shocking things I found at the get-go, was that they were, within a year or two of declaring insolvency, they were telling the members there was plenty of money there. And then the actual investigation showed that they were gambling hugely in hedge funds and other investments, and they were losing terribly. So the closer the pension got towards insolvency, the greater the risks the people running it were taking, which is the exact opposite of what you should do when you're running out of money.
So once again, this is Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show. Once again, this program was initially conceived to be in support of the book that Ted Siddell and I wrote. It's called Who Stole My Pension? It was going to be a 5-part series. And I had no idea how big this problem is. And I don't think the world knows how big it is. And so what the 5-part series is now expanding out to where my roommate from Vietnam is now going to speak up, and he's a congressman in the United States. And, he and I were pilots, and many of my fellow pilots lost their pensions also, but nobody's talking about it. So that's why this Rich Dad radio program and the latest book, Who Stole My Pension, are crucial, because you're going to find out how pervasive, not only in the U.S., But all over the world, our pensions have been stolen, ripped off. So when we come back, we'll be going a little bit more. Ted's going to talk about what he's found, where has that money disappeared to. Mark's going to be talking about how he's adjusted for a life without pension after working for 30 years as a loyal employee, and to find out somebody stole our pensions. We'll be right back. Back, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about your pensions. And once again, the book we're promoting right now is called Who Stole My Pensions? And Miss Sarah here, my producer, we thought, well, we'll do a little 5-part series to help promote the book, Who Stole My Pension? And the more we promote it, the more people come out of the woodwork saying, I've been screwed, this is what's really going on. And the reason this is an important show is pensions make, I think it's a $14 trillion shortfall in the U.S. alone. You know, that's bigger than Bernie Sanders' plan of how to give free medical to everybody. So our guests today are Ted Siddell. Again, he's my co-author in Who Stole My Pension. He's a former SEC attorney, SEC Securities and Exchange attorney, and he's a leading whistleblower on how these pensions are ripping people off. And our special guest today is Mark Green, who is part of the book Who Stole My Pension. And Mark is a 30-year veteran of UPS. This year he should have been retired at approximately $5,000 a month, which, you know, you can live decently on $5,000 a month, but now it's down to less than $900 a month. And so we're going to find out from Ted Siddell, where'd the money go? And secondly, from Mark Green, what are his plans now? The good thing is Mark is still a young man. If you're an old guy like me, you're in serious trouble. So anyway, Ted, what happened to the money?
Well, you know, Wall Street always has a solution to any problem. And Wall Street's solution to pension underfunding about 10 years ago was pay us more money. So what Wall Street did was they approached all of these pensions and said, the only way out of this severe underfunding is to gamble more. And so they created some of the highest cost, highest risk investments ever devised on Wall Street: hedge funds, private equity funds, venture capital funds, and fund of funds, all kinds of secretive, high-risk, high-cost investments, and sold them to pensions saying, this is the way to gamble your way out of insolvency. Well, of course, it didn't work. Gambling is not a solution to underfunding. It just almost always results in even greater underfunding. And that's what happens. So,
yeah, and Ted, how many of these pensions are in trouble in the United States right now?
Right now, there are 130 or so multi-employer pensions, like the New York State Teamsters pension that Mark Green is a member of, that are slated to be taken over by the government in the near future. That's 130 pensions, corporate pensions, that have over 1 million workers and, of course, their family members. So there are millions of people's lives who are going to be impacted.
And Mark Green, when you talk to people today about what happened to you after 30 years with UPS and your pension cut from about $5,000 to less than $1,000, what do people say to you? Do they believe you, or do they not? They say, no, this can't be happening. What happens when you tell them that?
Like I said earlier, it's very curious how a Fortune 500 company reporting record profits can have this kind of situation happen to its workers. It's baffling. So people don't get it. They don't believe it. But it's reality. It's really happening. We were the first group in upstate New York, the first few thousand workers from UPS to see these cuts, and we have to have a backup plan at this point. And unfortunately, we can't stay working at a job like this because, I'm not sure if anyone's heard, but UPS has, there's a special insurance classification that OSHA has given UPS workers. It's called industrial athlete, and that's been given for a reason, because our bodies sustain life-altering injuries. A lot of repetition, a lot of heavy lifting. It's a great paying job, but there's a cost. There's a price. And, your body is, how young do athletes retire? We see when they retire. They retire very young. And so working into your late 40s, 50s, it's just not doable. So a lot of people are retiring early with a greatly reduced pension. So I'm not going to be able to stay. I'm going to have to leave early and take that cut. So, I have a backup plan, fortunately, and a lot of other people do also. Thank goodness.
So what is your plan? Like I said, you're a relatively young man, but I'm at the tip of the baby boomer generation. We're pushing 72, 73 now, like with Trump. And what is your plan at 48?
Well, my plan is I invest in real estate. So, I work 60 hours right now at UPS. There's a lot of overtime. It's a great paying job. And I pretty much put that money into real estate investments, rental properties. So that's sort of my backup plan, because my pension was my 401k. I did not even participate in a 401k until maybe 3 years ago, when we saw how bad this pension plan was. Now, many would say, well, that's your own fault. You should have had a 401k. You should have known better. But frankly, I trusted the company. I trusted the union. And I didn't do a 401k. And that was that $500,000 I mentioned earlier, that was my 401k money. Okay. So now I'm playing catch up, working a lot of overtime and putting that money into real estate investments. And I can tell you right now, there's many of my colleagues doing the same thing, working long hours, and then we're going to retire and run our own businesses or do whatever.
Good. So, Ted, any comments on all that, or any suggestions for people who might be in, Mark's problem or Mark's challenge? And they're all over the world. Please hear me. This is not a U.S. issue. This is a global issue. Any suggestions?
Well, Robert, what Mark's talking about is kind of what you advocate, which is create your own 401k or your own retirement income plan, which in Mark's case, it sounds like rental property. And so that's a great alternative, is to, as much as you can, and not everybody can do it, but as much as you can, create your own type of retirement income through real estate or any other kind of business opportunity. But it just shows that if you have all your eggs in one basket, you need to watch that basket closely. Or alternatively, don't put all your eggs in one basket, and do like Mark, hedge your bets by making other investments that perhaps you have more control over.
So, Ted, let me ask this question. What happened to all that money? There was literally billions put into the fund. Where did it go?
Well, that money went straight to Wall Street. Through a wealth transfer. Basically, Wall Street came knocking on the door of all of these pensions and said, we have a solution for your underfunding, which is pay us more money. And so there was a wealth transfer. Money out of the pension went straight from workers' pockets to the pockets of Wall Street billionaires. And, the theory that this gambling would pay off has been completely demolished. I mean, the gambling hasn't paid off. There's not a single pension in this country that has soared in value because of the outrageous bets they took. The outrageous bets always went badly. And that's why we have your average state local pension is only 70% funded.
So with the coronavirus, kind of putting the market in turmoil, going up and down, it's looking kind of bleak, The other thing, too, is that, we cover it in Who Stole My Pension. There's two kinds of pension, and you covered the defined benefit, which is the benefit is guaranteed. Like, Mark was guaranteed, let's say, $5,000 a month. The second is contribution, which is a 401k. Are the people in 401ks any better off?
So the people in 401k have done terribly. The great 401k experiment that started in the 1970s and took off in the 1980s with IRAs and 401ks, which has meant investing in retail price mutual funds, has 40 years later resulted in your average 65-year-old having maybe $25,000, $30,000 saved for retirement. And half of workers have nothing saved. That's not a retirement plan. That's no substitute for a pension. But that's where we're at today.
And so, Ted, if somebody belongs to what we call a defined benefit, like a labor union or a teacher's union, firefighter or police officer pension, does it help to call you at all to look at them? Or, I mean, does it do any good?
Well, sure, we can do an investigation. We do crowd-funded investigations, where workers pledge like $50 each, and we do an investigation. Right now, recently I was contacted by the American Federation of Musicians, whose pensions are being taken over by the government. These are musicians all over the country.
Can you name some famous ones?
I don't know any of the famous ones, but I've been talking to a lot of them who are, in the they play in orchestras, and a number of them are recording musicians from Nashville. But of course, the most famous ones aren't really worried about the pension because they've made their money selling their music. But the rank and file musicians need this pension desperately to fund their retirement.
So going back to Mark Green, again, Mark is a 30-year veteran of UPS, and he was promised after 30 years he might make $5,000 a month, and now it's down to under $900. Mark, what advice would you give to young people who are counting on a pension? What would you say to them?
Don't put all your eggs in one basket, like you mentioned. Yeah. I mean, you have to diversify your investments. Like Ted said, start your own retirement plan, and ask a lot of questions. Don't be afraid to be labeled a trader. There were some people that were concerned that by being a member of TAP that they would be labeled a trader for investigating their pension fund, but it's the best thing you could do. And frankly, the Department of Labor asks for more audits, full scope audits, not limited scope audits, full scope audits. And that's what we need. We need more audits. We need more people like Ted Siddell to investigate these plans. And I hope people will heed that advice.
So Ted, like I said, we Sarah and I only planned for 5 of these things, but people are coming out of the woodwork. And so people are beginning to discover how big the problem is. But, I was going to be one of those guys who flew for United Airlines. And what happened to my fellow? I'm so naive. I was at a reunion with my friend, Congressman Jack Bergman, 3-star General Jack Bergman, Northwest pilot Captain Jack Bergman. And I was at this reunion in Pensacola, Florida. We all went through flight school. And I didn't know my classmates could not retire either, because even though they were high-paid pilots working for famous airlines, their pensions got stolen also. So Jack will be one of our upcoming guests on the Rich Dad Radio Show. So what happened to the pilots' unions, Ted?
Well, the pilots' union had the same fate. The biggest pension failure in around 2006 was United Airlines. United Airlines dumped their pilots' pension and other pensions onto the federal government, onto the PBGC. I met PBGC back then, and we offered to do a forensic investigation of what caused the pension to fail. And the government said they didn't want it done. We offered to do it for free on a contingency basis, And they said, ironically, that they, quote unquote, couldn't afford a free investigation. So, but Robert, one of the double whammies for pilots is federal law had been for years. I think it's been changed that all pilots had to retire by age 60.
Right.
So not only were these pilots going to see their pensions cut dramatically from like maybe $100,000 a year to $40,000 or less a year, they couldn't keep working. And I'm told that the pilots actually have a very high mortality rate, I'm told, because of radiation in the cockpit. But anyhow, it's doubly bad for pilots because they're only allowed to work a certain number of years. And if your pension gets taken away from you in your 50s, you're screwed.
So once again, it's Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, and again, Miss Sarah, my producer here, and we thought we'd do a 5-part series, but this keeps expanding as people were a little pissed off at all this whole thing coming out of the woodwork. And the reason this is an important program, the Rich Dad Radio program, was coronavirus and the stock market crash are big stories today. But the biggest story of all is what happens when these pensions start collapsing, and they already have. So I want to thank Ted Siddell and Mark Green for your contribution for sounding the alert, and I'll be back. Sarah and I will discuss what people can do. But again, thank you, Mark Green, and thank you, Ted. And we'll talk to you later.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. And so we come back. Sarah and I. Kim is in South Carolina with her sister. One of her sisters has passed away, so she's spending time with her remaining sister. So that's why she's not on this program. But anyway, we'll be right back. Welcome back, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about pensions. Either your 401k or your defined benefit, which are the pensions for firefighters, school teachers, and police officers, and labor union members. And I want to thank Ted Siddell. He's my co-author on the book, Who Stole My Pension? I recommend everybody get that book. Even if you're not about to retire, if you are a child of a person who's going to retire, you better know now quickly before you have a new roommate. And they want to talk to Mark Green. Thanks to Mark Green, 30-year veteran of UPS, and how they said thank you very much, from $5,000 to $900 a month for all your 30 years of service. And so we're just going to recap the show. So Sarah, what did you think of this?
It was nice to have a real, I don't want to call him a victim, but somebody who this has impacted their life so greatly on the show, because we can hear from experts, but I think it's a different perspective when you hear someone tell their story like, oh, I was promised $5,000 and now it's less than $1,000. And I think the truth is there are people all over this country that this is happening to, and they don't know it's happening.
Yeah. And it's not just this country, it's the world.
The world, right.
It's the world. In Australia, they're just finding out now that their banks have ripped off their pensions, and they thought they were safe.
Mm-hmm.
So, what do you see on social media? Because that's what you direct for us. Are people getting aware? Or are they kind of head in the sand yet?
I think that my expectation was that because we have a younger demographic watching the show and subscribing to our podcast, that I wasn't quite sure that. That it would touch them as deeply as it has. But shockingly, we've only, as of this recording, only one has actually aired. Today's airing is the Andy Tanner episode. But the people are coming out of the woodwork talking about, I'm a firefighter in California. I'm a school teacher in California. I'm a school teacher in Illinois, I've heard from, who they say, or I know somebody who is 70 years old, retired, and they flew for United, and their pension is zero. Right. I mean, this is something nobody's talking about, but it's affecting so many people.
Right. And in many ways, I think it's interesting that Ted Siddell's father was a CIA agent, and he disappeared. Mm-hmm. And so his family couldn't claim
they had
his
nothing.
benefits.
Right.
And my father made the similar mistake. He ran into the criminals of Hawaii, the governor and the legislature there, because they're all in cahoots. I mean, Hawaii's one of the most corrupt states in the nation. Mm-hmm. Every time I say that, my friends hate me, but, sometimes the truth hurts. But anyway, that's why Hawaii has no Republicans at all inside their government, and that's where Barack Obama comes from. I should tell you something about the state of Hawaii. And, it's amazing they don't fly the Cuban flag or the flag of Red China. But anyway, that's Hawaii for you. They're very, very pro-socialist, pro-communist. And my father fought that, and that's when he got crushed. So anyway, it's a very important program. I don't really take sides in this thing. I agree with Mark and Ted. You better get your own, put up your own plan. Like Sarah, I'm almost talking about every employee should have their own retirement plan anyway here at Rich Dad, right?
Right. Well, because Rich Dad doesn't offer a 401k. I mean, that's because we don't believe in it. And I think this.
Why should we feed the crooks?
Right. Well, and I think like Mark said, you asked Mark, what's his plan, and he said, well, I have I have real estate investments, or he was smart and prepared early,
right?
Not knowing that this would happen,
right?
But I don't. There are so many people who were relying on that word guaranteed. Right. This is a guaranteed benefit. That was one of the comments in YouTube that I just read. My mother was was promised this retirement.
Right.
A promise means nothing.
Right. So again, a little 5-series pension time bomb series is expanding. Like I said, in a few weeks, we'll have my own roommate from Vietnam. We're both carrier pilots together in Vietnam, and I left the Marine Corps as lieutenant, and he left the Marine Corps as lieutenant general, and he went on to fly for Northwest. And now he's a U.S. congressman from Michigan, and he's going to be talking about what he witnessed as a pilot and now as a congressman of how Wall Street and even our U.S. government and the SEC, which Ted worked for, a lot of the SEC attorneys go and work for the pension companies afterwards. And Ted refused to do that. He said, I'm going to be a whistleblower on these guys. Yeah. So that's our book, Who Stole My Pension? And that's why this series, it used to be 5 series. Now it's going to 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 maybe. But I think it's the most important program you can listen to because most people don't know what's happening yet.
Yeah.
And like Mark Green, he's already being proactive and he's going to do fine. But for those who are pretending it's all going to be fine, I think you might be in serious trouble. Yeah.
Upcoming guests include Phoenix City Councilman Sal DeCiccio.
Yeah, so he hates those guys. He hates those pension guys.
He's been fighting for years. I know, because we're local here in Arizona, but, I know that is something he's very passionate. So I'm excited to talk to him. Jack Bergman, as you mentioned. We have Kenny McElroy will be on the show to give solutions. So
what can you do?
And I think that's important for our listeners to know. And the last message I'd like to put out to the listeners of this is these shows are so important and nobody's talking about them. So please, please, please share these shows with your friends and family and just open their eyes, to what's happening around them.
So thank you, Sarah. So in conclusion, you can listen to Rich Dad Radio anytime, anywhere on iTunes or Android or YouTube. And if you watch and view this program, please leave us a comment. We'd like to hear from you. And all of our programs are archived at richdadradio.com. The reason we archive them is so if you have a friend who is driving for UPS right now, you may want to say, hey, better listen to this program. Or somebody's a school teacher in California, listen to this program. Or somebody's a firefighter, listen to this program. Because the earlier you know what's going on, the better chance of survival you had. So once again, all of our programs are archived at richdadradio.com. You can listen to it and share it with your friends. And if you have a question, use hashtag AskRichDad on social media. Thank you all for listening to this program.
hãy nhớ biết bao. Tôi xa quê bao năm tháng qua, nhưng trong trái tim không bao giờ xa. Lời mẹ ru con hiu hiu trẻ, mùa lụt nước lũ bắt